Stop being fooled by AI. Stop leaving your students without information, because we are opening the first cohort of the course Brazil in World War II at the Academia SDG. Live classes starting on May 26th. Scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description to learn more and enroll. This is definitely one of the most interesting projects currently under development in Europe, focused on the restoration of historic aircraft. You might be wondering, hey, but aren't there other Focke-Wulfs still flying? Other Focke-Wulfs out there, including many of them in museums and some examples that are flying. But look, many of the Focke-Wulfs that are flying are replicas, right? I believe there's only one original Focke-Wulf flying today. All the others are replicas from a German company called Focke-Wulf. Focke-Wulf, which even uses the Russian engine, the Schwarzkopf, to power the aircraft, right? So when we come across a headline like this, that the Hungarian Focke-Wulf project is still going on, it's really interesting to look at why. First, because Hungary was the last ally still fighting, right? The last European ally of Germany to remain on Germany's side in World War II. Hungary suffered a coup d'etat in the first half of 1944, which would have been pro-Soviet. The Germans invaded Budapest, took control of the city, and installed a pro-German government, which basically lasted until the end of the war. So the Hungarians, unlike the others, right? The Bulgarians, Romanians, and the rest of Germany's European allies switched sides in World War II, but Hungary did not, okay? So, because of that, the Hungarians ended up receiving a batch of Focke-Wulf F-8S, look at the timing, in November 1944, right at the end of the war. And for you to understand how these Focke-Wulfs ended up in the Hungarian Air Force, we need to understand how the Hungarian Air Force got involved with the Luftwaffe and the fighting on the Eastern Front, right? Why? Because these Focke-Wulfs here, they were attack versions, ground attack versions that carried bombs, right? F-8 versions, as you can see in this photo right here. And this, we can trace the origin all the way back to Barbarossa in 1941, when Hungary declared war on the Soviet Union. 3 days later, 3 or 4 days after Germany declared war on the Soviet Union, right? Hungary enters the war as well. And then Hungary had a very outdated air force, really outdated. They used a lot of the Italian Reggiani 2000 aircraft, right? It was the only country really to actually put the Reggiani 2000 on the front line against an enemy air force. It was the Hungarians. But after that, the Hungarians would start receiving Messerschmitts. And once the Hungarians receive the Messerschmitts, they're going to form their own fighter squadron, right? The Puma fighter group, which to this day is, let's say, one of the biggest symbols of the Hungarian Air Force, are the Pumas. But they also create ground attack units. They create battlefield interdiction units. Why? Because the Hungarian Air Force, the components, the Hungarian squadrons on the front line, they are placed in 1941 under the command of the 8th Flieger Corps, the 8th Flieger Corps. And if you've ever heard of the 8th Flieger Corps, you know very well what I'm talking about. It was the Luftwaffe's premier ground attack unit, right? It's the unit of Field Marshal Wolfram von Richthofen, cousin of the Red Baron. And he was the guy who stood out the most in the Luftwaffe as a commander of Stuka formations. It was Richthofen, right? So the tactical heritage of the Hungarian Air Force goes back to 1941 and 42, when they became subordinate, right? They entered the chain of command of Wolfram von Richthofen as attackers of the Soviet front line, okay? Providing support to the army on the ground. Because of that, since they were now Germany's last European ally, for propaganda purposes, it was also very interesting to provide top-of-the-line equipment to your only allies. So, the Focke-Wulfs. 72 of these Focke-Wulfs were sold, actually given to Hungary, in November of 44, remaining in combat until April 16, 1945. Of course, the fall of Budapest in February 1945 to the Red Army made this situation even worse, right? It definitely made the situation worse and caused the Hungarians' operations to be greatly reduced, right? But, guys, what does this article tell us here? It tells us that this guy here, look, Andor Bernashki, right? This same guy I showed you here wearing a cap, he's one of the heads of the restoration project for this Hungarian Focke-Wulf. This Focke-Wulf is not a single aircraft. It's a combination of several aircraft that were found across battlefields and also in barns. People, individual donors, contributed rescued parts over time to be able to build a single Focke-Wulf. So this one here, out of the 72 original Hungarian Focke-Wulfs, is the last survivor. It's kind of a Frankenstein made from all those Focke-Wulfs. So you can see that it carries this aura of historical heritage, with each of them contributing a small part so that in the end, a single aircraft could be displayed as a historical piece. And the Hungarians, they don't just want to display the plane, okay? Their ultimate goal is to get the plane flying. They want to get the plane flying so they can do shows throughout Hungary and Europe in the colors of the Hungarian Air Force. I find that interesting, especially because Bernashki here, look, he already said that he has an engine, a BMW, a complete Focke-Wulf engine. He's also looking for a second engine. I think it's either to have a spare or to get better parts and make one functional engine. And He-Man has already restored. The only part he has fully restored is this one right here. Look, it was the propeller, okay? The propeller drive. So the plane is still in pretty rough shape. Look, the engine he got here. Look, the BMW 801, it's still in a pretty rough state. Yeah, for restoration, it was only assembled as a single aircraft. However, it's in no condition to even be displayed. That's why it's not in a museum, in any of the major military history museums in Hungary. It's in a small, private little museum near Budapest. As you can see here, the exhibit is set up right on the floor with photos of the aircraft. Yeah, some color photos of the plane here. So that's how we should see this plane in the end, right? But he's saying, Andor Bernashki here, that English, German, and even American tourists are going there in large numbers to be able to see this Focke-Wulf and also to help fund the restoration of this Focke-Wulf. He even said that it's quite possible they will transfer this Focke-Wulf to the United States for restoration, because in the United States there are workshops and companies that are used to and qualified to restore an aircraft like this. Because after all, the aircraft like this one that flies today belongs to the Flying Heritage Museum, which was Paul Allen's museum, Bill Gates' partner at Microsoft. And Paul Allen really financed the restoration of a complete Focke-Wulf with a complete engine. Everything was done correctly so the original could fly in the United States. So I believe that Paul Allen's Focke-Wulf, the late Paul Allen, is now the only truly original one flying. There are several Focke-Wulfs flying in Europe, including at Hangar 10, which is up in northern Germany, right on the Baltic Sea, almost on the border with with Poland. And there's also a French Focke-Wulf that flies at various air shows. It's a Focke-Wulf owned by a French owner, also from Focke-Wulf. It's a Focke-Wulf replica. In 2010, I was at the Focke-Wulf factory and got into the cockpit of one of those Focke-Wulfs. So really, the replica is very accurate. And one of those Focke-Wulfs was bought by Roland Amaro, the late owner of TAM at the time. Look at when that was, around the year 2000. And that Focke-Wulf, unfortunately, the one that's in Brazil, unfortunately, I believe we'll never see it assembled, because the last photo I have of it is from 2010, 2012, something like that. And it's quite likely that those parts don't even exist anymore, right? I'm just saying what I think. But ever since the Latam Museum was moved to Sao Paulo, And people talk about transferring the collection. Nobody mentions the Focke-Wulf. Everyone talks about the Spitfire, the Messerschmitt, the Corsair, the P-47, but nobody talks about this Focke-Wulf. So I think this Focke-Wulf has already had parts taken from it. It's disappeared, and today it's just something. It's no longer a complete airplane, right? So we're going to follow this restoration here to see if we get to see another original Focke-Wulf restored. Maybe flying through the skies, gracing events and aviation fairs across Europe. Okay? So, if you want to keep up with more news like this, stay with us here in the Sala de Guerra. Don't forget that on May 26th, we start our Brazil course. On World War II, the most complete and definitive course on this topic in the Portuguese language. Be part of the select group in Sala de Guerra that will learn this from beginning to end and clear up all your questions with me live. Here, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description to learn more and enroll.